Hi, this is Ruth Chase. I am the artist for the West of Lincoln project. The audio clips you're about to hear were recorded in 2016 and 2017. Each image was submitted from people all over the world and relates to an experience in Venice, California. The image was then reproduced on the painting West of Lincoln, completed in 2017.
Hi, I'm Beth Allen, also known as Miss Venice, MS Venice. And about 7 years ago, I had an idea to translate the sign over Windward Circle that says Venice to the front of my bike. Now I ride around, lit up like Venice every single night. I think Venice is paradise. I really do. For me, it's a creative center. It really isn't so much a place as it is a feeling, an emotion, just a state of being. I was living in Louisville, Kentucky, and I wanted to get back to the beach. I just did. And Venice really, it called to me all the way across the country. I remember the moment I drove into Venice, and I was meant to come here. This is my home. This is a mix of a lot of different kinds of people. And in Venice, we have a rather large homeless population. Now, when I made my bike sign, the front of the bike, it lights up at night. So during the beginning, the early days, I would ride an oceanfront walk, and a lot of homeless people. I mean, it really was like a gauntlet out there. But when I would ride by, if I lit up their night, and they started calling me Miss Venice. And it just really stuck with me. I realized that my bike made people smile. No matter how bad their day was, my bike could make them smile. And it made me really happy. And that's how it came to be. To this day, it's probably the best part of riding a bike, day or night, is how it makes people smile.
For your painting is of me in front of a mural at the Venice Pavilion. And a gentleman had asked me if I would skate by this particular spot, and as you can see, it's a wonderful spot on the mural. It ended up in an article that was talking about trying to ban roller skaters from some areas on the boardwalk, which of course would have interfered with people like me who roller skated from the pavilion to the Santa Monica Pier back and forth a few times a day. This would have been the late 70s, probably like around 78. In fact, it was Thornton Avenue and Oceanfront Walk where I found this van that was selling or renting roller skates out of the back of it. It was a couple guys, Cheapskates, these brothers. Yeah. So when I saw these guys renting these skates, I mean, that was just amazing to me. And I was, I believe, the first female roller skater in Venice. Didn't even have to rent the skates. They let me have them because they said I was advertising. You know, a couple Z-boy friends taught me how to do some tricks. Freedom of, like I said, with, you know, just flying on my roller skates between the pavilion and Monica Pier. And it's so good to go back and have one more day of that freedom.
My name's John Reneau, and the photo I submitted was me as a young boy. And looking back at the date of the photo, I was surprised to find out I was 3. And I'm sitting in the Venice canals, throwing rocks at a old, I think it's a Coors beer can, the pull tab type. My memory of it was that it was some type of ship, like a pirate ship, and then I had this whole fantasy around attacking the ship. And it's weird because I don't have a lot of memories of me even older, like 5 or 6, but for some reason that period I have a lot of memories of being 3 in Venice, which I think I had, you know, the situation we're in, we had to be really self-reliant to survive. And so I kind of created a lot of fantasy worlds, more dealable, I guess. I think he was my mom's boyfriend at the time, who was this black man who played flute. And my memory is like he reminded me of Jimi Hendrix. And he was very artistic. And yeah, she lived there with him, right on the canals. And at that point, they were pretty gross. Poor neighborhood. I mean, really poor. It's hard to imagine when you look at it now. There was a big mural painted across the street. I don't know if my mom did it or if he did it. I know they were both artists. but the canals were like super low. There was just algae in them, and dead fish everywhere.
My name is Joanne Goodwin. The picture I submitted was me kneeling by the breakwater wall, thinking you can always come home. I grew up in Venice, California. I'm a second generation Venetian. Both my parents were from Venice. Went to Westminster Elementary School, Mark Twain Junior High, and Venice High School. At 13, my mom moved to Culver City. I tried to live there, and I didn't feel right there. It wasn't home. Venice was always my home, so I ran away from home. My good friends took me in, Candace Lingerfeld, and the Kovacs, Leona and Roxanne, and Thomas Dugan. They would make sure I was all right and take care of me and always gave me a place to stay. I was what you called a runner. I ran away from home all the time because I didn't feel right in Culver City. Venice was my home. I left Venice at 21 in 1984, and I came back when I was 50. And that's when the picture was taken. And I was sitting there thinking, you can always come home. Venice, no matter where you go or what you do in life, if you're from Venice, Venice is always home. They say you bleed blue. Venice isn't just a city or a town. It's a life, a camaraderie that you'll never find anywhere else. Once you are from Venice, you're always from Venice.
That photo was taken on my 16th birthday. It was a surprise birthday. My friends told me to go to the beach for the day and to stay away and don't try to get a hold of them. They were busy. So I went and I spent the day down at the breakwater. This is why I'm a bit red in the painting. No sunscreen. I was not using sunscreen. And Troy had picked me up in his truck, his old truck that he had spent a lifetime restoring. What was his next door neighbor's house in Venice on Oakwood and Palms Avenue. Pulled up, and all of my friends threw the garage door open and came out screaming surprise. It was a big surprise. I was shocked, very happy, and all of my friends I was basically born and raised with in Venice were there in the garage. There was a piñata, and it was filled with a lot of things that shouldn't be in a Sweet 16 piñata. And there was all the girls, Melanie, Nina, Meta, everybody, they made big pots of chili beans and just wonderful food. There was a lot of food. They had spent the day cooking. The girls were cooking and the guys were setting up the backyard. And Troy had made this big wood stand that said happy birthday. And it was just a fun day with all my friends that, I grew up with in Venice, and it was wild. It was a wild party.
My name is Doug Swanson, and I'm an artist, and I grew up in Venice, California. The photograph was taken by another Venice artist named Carolyn Burns. And I'm looking up at the sunset going down, and I'm wearing some board trunks from the Venice Originals surf shop there. Growing up in Venice is an extremely cultured town and neighborhood, very welcoming and nurturing to the arts. If you're a kid in the 70s and 80s growing up in Venice and you got your ears on, you are going to absorb some amazing stuff, and it's probably going to come out in your art later in life. And I started playing in bands in the garage with my friends. We started playing punk rock. We started playing speed metal. Went on to win some awards for my bass playing in Memphis, Tennessee. And those are my fondest memories, growing up riding beach cruisers around, terrorizing in backyard parties.
This is Hassan DeSalles from Venice, California. Photo is of me and Jason Sugars, my bestest friend in the entire world. And that is the antithesis of our relationship. Jason was the yin to my yang. He was the beat maker and I was the action guy. He was the person who kept me grounded. Without that man in my life, I probably would have floated away like a helium balloon with no string attached. And still to this day, you fast forward 35 years, we're still as close as ever. On that day, we sought refuge on the boardwalk. This was, 80s, 70s, 80s, and, you know, most of us came from single parent backgrounds, and my mom worked. She was always at work. You know, rather than sit around the house and play video games, you know, we went to the boardwalk, and that was pretty much our refuge. I remember, you know, hanging out at the pagodas and talking to homeless people for hours and hearing their stories, you know, and for the most part, look at a homeless person and most people automatically assume that this person is a drug addict or he's crazy and he's just a waste of space. Like I said, growing up in Venice, the homeless was definitely a major part of our lives, you know, because they were always there. And I remember sitting on, you know, at the pagoda and talking to homeless people that used to be doctors and lawyers and had like amazing stories and like so much wisdom. Like I said, the boardwalk was the meeting place. I just saw a picture of Cheapskates, yeah, now what a spot. Yeah, roller skating on the boardwalk, skateboarding on the boardwalk, meeting girls on the boardwalk, getting cheap food on the boardwalk. It was home away from home.
And when I applied for the job, and 2 days after I applied, I got a phone call from Naomi Parker. And I went the next day to Phoenix. I wore this crisp little white linen dress. I was trying to be, you know, like really cool and like, you know, sophisticated. How did I know? I didn't have any idea really what it was. And she hired me on the spot. Fell in love with the students, and I learned to accept you, whoever you are, where you were and how you were, and tried to fit in like how I could work with this. You know, I mean, I'll never forget, he was a gangbanger. I wanted him to write an essay, just anything about himself. I said, you know, like, just give me a paragraph. What do you want to write about? He sits there and he writes 3, maybe 5 sentence paragraph, and he gives it to me. And I am like so happy because he has never done anything. And it's about how you steal radios. Asked him to write what he knew. I think he eventually dropped out, I heard him. But that was, you know, that was what I had to do, is accept you where you were. And so Mike, you know, he wrote about stealing cars or radio. So I mean, it was interesting teaching at Phoenix because I got all sorts of students. A beginning teacher living in Oakwood with 2 kids and no financial help. So I was like a broke, poor person too. And students who were trying to avoid the gangs in other areas who came in, we had challenges. These were kids who had not been successful in school. Many of them had family problems.
Including myself. I mean, I ended up at Phoenix because I had family issues, attendance issues, and learning challenges.
And that was the biggest reason why students came to us. But then when I got a student like you, or Case Weintraub, or Clifton Burnett, or who's just, you know, at the regular school, nobody was recognizing their intelligence and their creative ability. And so even though I was dealing with some kids who could only write a 3-sentence paragraph, I also was able on the other side to get turned on to the fact that if you did the work and you thought about it and you get credits, you get to the next class, whatever. And I learned that a lot of kids, if you just, you know, hold them up and send them on their way.
Jeff, and the photograph is a picture of me on the roof of the Waldorf Apartments at Westminster Avenue and Oceanfront Walk in Venice. It was taken on the 4th of July, I believe in 1990, when we were having a party on the roof of the building I was temporarily managing at 21 Westminster, called the El Dorado Apartments. We had just finished building a rooftop deck that morning, and we wanted to take a picture of it, so we managed to sneak into the Waldorf and get up to the roof. We took a picture of the deck, and then also I said, why don't we take one of me out front? That is the picture you see here. And the reason why it's significant for me is because eventually I became manager of the El Dorado, and Westminster Avenue there became my home neighborhood for the next 12 years. And is pretty much what I still think of as home, even though I have moved away from there since. Venice is the place where my family came back to, the place where my grandfather Jimmy Wood winter quartered his circus in the 40s, and where we came back to in the mid-70s after traveling and living all over the country. The place where we could finally make friends that would last a lifetime, a place diverse and varied in its people and ideas, but also like a small town that just happens to be sandwiched between the beach and a huge city. a true crossroad of the world where my friends from around the globe come to, where individuality is the uniform and expression is uninhibited. Where I first fell in love and first did most things I probably shouldn't have. When I travel, I still love to come back because I always run into a familiar face, and that makes it home for me.
My name is Christina Peterson, and I grew up in Venice. The picture is of my dad and I. It's about 1972. My dad's name was Alfred Peterson. A lot of people called him Al. Giving him a kiss, he had a foundry. He started it in about the mid-1960s, and he cast bronze, which was pretty cool. It was back in the day when you can still do that kind of stuff in Venice. And one of the reasons why I love that pic is it really showed my dad. My dad was one of the kindest, smartest men I know, and he kind of shows in that picture. He also was a true Venetian. Not only did his own artwork, but he also was able to help people, get their sculptures to fruition, get it from wax into bronze. He knew a lot of cool, true Venice artists. He had the really coolest childhood ever. Growing up in Foundry was awesome. I didn't realize how awesome it was when I was growing up. And my heart will always be in Venice. I might live in San Monica now. My heart will always be in Venice. I'm very grateful that I got to grow up in a time when Venice was really funky and cool. The shop is now a movie production. And I understand change is the only constant, and change happens, but it kind of gets me sad. My dad truly was a true Venetian. I got to do the funnest thing because of him. He had taken a shopping cart, which is totally illegal, and chopped it and made a little go-kart for my sister and I, complete with a steering wheel and an axle, and we used to tow it around our block with a moped. And it's those kind of memories that I just cherish. You wouldn't be able to do that nowadays.
My name at that time was Colleen Gidley, and this was early 60s. I was about 13 years old. And this day I went down to the beach with my dog, U2. We also had a black one just like this, and his name was Me Too. This place here was the Pavilion. It was a place that everybody liked to go to. I just loved being there in Venice at that time, and we lived in the canals. We used to go to the beach and get our tans and then walk around on the boardwalk to show off our tans at that time. I also went to Mark Twain and Venice High School. Venice was a cool and neat place to be at that time. I actually lived in Venice until I met my husband, moved to Paris, California. So I was there from early 60s to early 90s. You can't walk down on the beachfront like it was when I first moved there. You could walk. It wasn't all the things that they do on the weekend and everything. It was just laid back and easy going.
My name's Dale Henderson, born and raised in the Big B. Been through it all, man. We've been through the blood, the guts, the glory, man. And some of us survived it, some of us didn't. The way I survived mine is I ventured towards the artistic music part of Venice. That Venice really was an eclectic place. You could do anything really back in our day. And I chose music to get me out of all that crap. And it improved my life. In my music, got me more spiritual, got me more closer to myself. Obviously, in songwriting, songs come from within you, and that's how you create your own music, man. That's how Bill became part of my life, and which will always be part of my life and Venice. Well, the photograph that she painted was from one of my last shows I did, and it was a sold-out show, it was a benefit show for a cat who had some cancer. Great show, man. And it was people were there who weren't from Venice, but just loved Venice. And the shot you got was one shot where I was just digging it. I was in it, man. I was in the moment. I was in the reel, you know what I'm saying? It was in the Venice field, you know what I'm saying? So I'm glad you picked that picture, and it says a lot about how I play and why I play. It's just been a wild ride, I tell you. That's where the best music comes from. Your trials and your tribulations and all the junk and your ability to overcome it. You know, that's where strength comes and your spirituality comes. If you don't have it.
My name is Melanie Camp from Australia. I was going to have to just take what I could get. I was looking in Craigslist for jobs. There was this job advertised saying, do you know Venice? We need someone to write about Venice Beach. Well, I can do that. I know good coffee spots. So I applied and they basically gave me the job. So yeah, me and my dog, Tricka, she was this like little scruffy white dog with a black head, and she was a rescue and really scrappy and just the most perfect. She was totally Venice. She would just tear around with me, like we'd just pound the pavement and just get stories. Yo, Venice really got me, it got me out of bed every day because I had to get out of bed, and Tricka got me out of bed every day because get out there every day. And she had cancer, and I'd spent like, when we were rich, had spent like 20 grand or something fixing her cancer, and she'd been cancer free for like 3 years, and the vet was like, this is amazing, this never happened. So that kind of, those things kept me going. So we just chase stories together, and Venice was, I mean, it's nowhere near what it used to be, but there is a roughness to Venice, and there is sort of a darkness to Venice. And I think that really suited me. You know what, I feel very sunny and happy, and I always have a positive spin on life. You know, I'm grateful for even the bad things because it makes you who you are. But I feel that things that I've gone through in my life give me a little bit of a darker undercurrent. Might not be first obvious on the surface, and I think Venice is exactly the same. Like, it's this beachside town with palm trees and sunshine, but there's a darkness that really, the history of this place, and it still has, the energy is still there, and there's still people that are drawn to that darkness. I suppose you can't have depth without darkness. You can probably have darkness without depth, I think, but you can't have depth without a bit of darkness.
This is Luciano Mota. Here you see the first time I walked on Venice Boardwalk. I had no words to describe what I was feeling. Too much energy in just one place. It was Sunday, so you can imagine how Venice was that day. A lot of people, music, art, and energy. The sun was shining. It was hot like in the summertime, but it was winter. I went to Venice for the first time just for walk around and have a good time. But I started to look for some place for rent that Sunday. I used to walk in every little street looking for signs written for rent. So that Sunday became a big challenge, but I didn't find any place that afternoon. 1 week before this picture, I was in Brazil planning to stay for 6 months in Cali. Then I went to Venice that Sunday and everything changed. I really wanted to be part of that area, so I left everything behind to experience the Venice lifestyle. Definitely was the first time I saw so many different people doing their different things, but all living in peace. The atmosphere that day was incredible. The sun, the surfers, the skaters, the art, the music, everything together was really amazing. 2 months after I went to Venice for the first time, I finally was living there, just 2 blocks from the beach, in a small studio close to everything I loved since I knew this magical place for the first time. This place changed my life in every way.
The photograph was taken at a bar on Windward Avenue called The Brig. It was my father's bar and a buddy of his, and they went in halves on it when I was 4 years old. My father was in the Navy in World War II, and so was his best friend, Babe Brandelli. Betty Brandelli was my mom's best friend. Babe and Betty didn't have enough money to go in to buy the Brig, and Babe was also a well-known boxer, and so was my father. Babe one day asked my dad while he was sitting on a bar stool bench in the brig, asked my dad if he wanted to go in halves to keep the bar going. And my dad said, yeah, and pulled out my mother's whole entire life savings. They were underground bookies, and they used to take bets for everybody that was in the bar. And underneath the staircase in the brig, there's a little office where my dad would do all his work and all that illegal activity with the underground bookies. And I used to go into that bar when I was a little girl, and I would clean the bar stools and the bar back for my father and his best friend. It was fun growing up in there because I got to sit in the little corner and drink Cokes out of a bottle. I can't remember what his name was, but she had him paint the mural in memory of her husband and her and all their good memories from that bar. Babe and Betty used to live up in the house upstairs, and they had two big gigantic poodles, and it was Trixie and Dixie. And they would pay me 10 cents an hour to walk their dog. 9 years old, so I would take them down the train track because behind the bar used to be a really long train track that went all the way to the beach. My oldest brother Rudy is almost 70 years old, and he used to jump on that train and ride to school. Time went on, and my father passed away in 1979, and the other co-owner of the bar, he passed away as well. Recently, I just lost my mother, and so I took a trip back down to Venice, to Memory Lane, to look at the mural on the brig. So I went in there to have a drink, and boy, let me tell you, it has changed. Whoa, what a long way from coming from my father's bar. And it was pretty cool in there. Everybody was having a good time. Venice, to me today, is not what it used to be when we grew up. We grew up in little tiny houses on the canals, just old Victorian homes, and now today it's just run over by tourists. And I was reading in a book that it was the #1 tourist attraction in the world. When I was growing up there, nobody liked Venice. They thought it was dirty, nasty, and we would sit at the pavilion steps and we would laugh at all these people that would talk about our town. And now I live in Las Vegas, and we have the same exact thing going on. People from all walks of life, from all over the world coming here. I don't recognize Venice anymore, but I tell you, I wish I had the money to go live there.
My name is Ananda, and this is a picture of my mother and myself and my half-brother walking down the boardwalk. This picture was taken about 5 years before my mother passed away of cervical cancer. I was given the duty or the honor of when my mother passed away of putting her ashes at the breakwater where my brother Dylan had drowned when he was 13. I had also put his ashes there. So the picture holds a special place in my heart because she's healthy and young. It just kind of represents the Venice that I remember growing up in. I've been back to visit many, many times. Venice just isn't the same. My mother always said that once you live in Venice, you'll always return because it's inside of your heart. But I think I only return now to the Venice that's inside of my heart because that's what I hold dear to.
This is just a picture of my brother Campbell skateboarding back in 1976 when we were just little kids. We used to skateboard a lot down in Venice and before the skate park and all that. We spent most of our time down there on Venice Beach, you know, right around near the pavilion and stuff, skateboarding up and down between Santa Monica Pier and Venice Pier. But we used to ride our bicycles down there with our kickboards and belly boards and go down to Rose Avenue. You know, skateboarding was always part of us, literally from day one. I think Campbell was 12 in that picture.
Biography of Bob Dean Robinson, done by Shannon LeFort. When I heard about this project, I could not help but submit this photo of my grandfather, which was my absolute favorite, and he is my hero of all heroes. He was born in 1928 at 539 Indiana Avenue and 5th Avenue on the living room floor with a midwife. Very poor, had a single mom who struggled to raise him along with his brother and sister, working 3 jobs at the time. They then moved to 341 Vernon and 4th, which is where the picture was taken, where he was working out in the backyard. He went to Venice High School in 1941. Back then, apparently there was no middle school, so you went to high school for 6 years. While at Venice High School, he played football, but he also had an edge to him. He was a gang member in a gang called the Combos, in which he has tattooed on his upper right arm to this day. He was kind of a bad boy from the wrong side of the tracks, meaning west of Lincoln. Met my grandmother. They got married in 1947 and ended up having 3 children of their own. Played semi-pro football after Venice High School for the Venice Athletic Club, and then went on to work at Edgemar on 4th and Rose. He then went on to become a firefighter in 1957 for the city of Beverly Hills. When my mom passed away, his only daughter, I was age 3, and he and my grandmother took me in and raised me as their own. He took care of his own mother until the day she died, along with his sister, and along with my daughter, too, who is now 26. I can't think of any other example of a wonderful man that came from nothing that just became everything to everyone around him.
My name is Gonzales. Born and raised in Venice. Still live in 60 Sunset. I would call myself one of the last little Mohican families. Parents, one came from Texas and one came from Mexico. The car in the photograph was purchased back in 1991. It needed a lot of restoration, so I did like I said. I picked this color because I seen the color when I was a little kid back in 63. Well, I had a 63 Impala, similar to this color. One of the things we like to do is we have to go out and go cruising. The person in the front seat is actually, her name is Monica. We went out with about 7 of the cars, cruising that night to William Boulevard. Monica's an old friend from high school. She wanted to sit in the front seat. She was having a blast in the front. And I was cruising around driving. Started cruising Hollywood Boulevard about the age of 8 with one of my dad's friends who had a 48 Chevy and Fusion Classic Lowriders. After that, I graduated up to a 1962 Impala, like I fully restored myself. Love cruising those cars. A little bit about my pops. He was born in 1942. Came down from Colorado in 1950 to Venice, California. He established his foundation at 1348 West Washington. That's where my grandparents and my dad established their lives. My dad went to Mark Twain. He went to Venice High School. He also stomped around in Oakwood area for many decades. After that, he went to Vietnam, and he did a couple tours in Vietnam, and he came back to the Mar Vista area, and they lived there ever since, him and my mom. There's a lot of things I would like to say about my pops. It's really hard for me to talk about. The only thing is that, I wish that I could have had closure with my dad on some issues. I didn't get to see him. He was coming back from the Philippines when he passed. So, but, I talked to him through my prayers, and that I just wish that it could have been done in person.
My name's James Timothy Fallon. They used to call me Jimbo back in those days. I know there's a few Jimbos nowadays, but was born and raised in Mar Vista, went to Venice High, Mark Twain, Beethoven. Picture is of me and Brady Dalton, who was a long time friend of mine. He's no longer with us. But we were just a team to be reckoned with, sort of, and his brother Randy. And that's when we'd go to left side of Venice Pier, and we'd have these epic parties that were, some of them were mellow, but then when everybody showed up, it was just epic. It turned into an epic scale of craziness. I'd say the late 70s into the early 80s. And it was just fun. Just him and me were inseparable. Then he married Bridget King. And his brother Randy, him and me were pretty close to Randy Dalton. And everybody just gets older and just sort of goes their own way. I talk to people down there. Yeah, I'm close to a lot of my brother Johnny's friends. Like Campbell, Jeff, all those guys. Churkis, Colin, just there's a lot of people that I do know still in Venice, and I'd when I go down there, I always run into somebody.
My name is Francisco Xavier. I'm a visual artist, and I live in Venice, California. Ruth, I'm so glad that you used a portion of my large portable mural Venice clown, otherwise known as Payaso Venezlan. I took the idea of the now iconic Venice clown sculpture on Main Street and Rose to talk about present conditions in Venice. It shows it was the famous and first crying clown that came out of the American Depression. It was part of everyone's America because everyone has gone through the Depression. The changes in Venice about homelessness, about having a home, showing how people sometimes call Venice Silicon Beach, and also the clown, a lot of tattoos on his arms, and those tattoos were the name of homeless people who had encountered violent death in situations dealing with the Los Angeles Police Department. On Windward Avenue, there is now an ongoing investigation. The police officer that took his life has been decommissioned, etc. So it was really a painting response to events in my community. And there's a lot of things happening right now because of the changes in what is called gentrification in Venice, to tell people, well, where does this icon come from? Why are people interested in clowns? Is there such a thing as an American clown? And just by scratching underneath the surface, you really get a lot of great information to talk about the things that we are confronting today. The original mural is painted on canvas, and it was made during the Abercrombie Street Fair in August 2 years ago now, or almost 2 years ago, and had a lot of people come and participate in it. That's what I love about those kinds of public art projects, is that we're painting a mural that had to do with something going on in the community that is affecting many people. And when you create a collective work, it serves as a catalyst for more conversations. A lot like this large group painting that you've created for your exhibition, Ruth, has entails conversations such as this one that you and I are having, and the exchange of a lot of information that might not ever see the light of day if it weren't for that cultural act of making something that isn't solely from the mind of an artist, but that encompasses gathering information, gathering voices to get a more whole vision.
So, my name is Mike Bravo, Jr., actually. I live here in Venice, off of Sun 76, on my grandma's property. Family's been here since, well, in this house anyway, since the 40s, early 40s we bought the house, but my grandma, my great-grandma, my great-great-grandma moved here in the early 20s, I want to say like 1923 or something like that. The image I submitted, it's a picture of my father. It was taken, I want to say like 1982 perhaps. You know, like I said, he died when I was 7 in 1983. I'm 42 now. It's over here on Rose. Right near 3rd, on the north side of the street, these apartments that one of them had a mural, his friend's mural, but it said Venice. I think it said Venice 13, or no, it said Venice Grande, Big Venice, on the mural, and he's just posing, and I think he's smoking a cigarette too, just kind of a nice, you know, macho Venice pose. Cool, right on. So my dad, Mike Bravo Sr., so he was born and raised here. They said he grew up, you know, and everybody knew him out here on the beach and everywhere we went. Back then, too, I think, you know, they didn't really call the gangs back then, if I'm not mistaken, like back in the early, 50s and 60s. He was born in 1929, by the way. He died when he was 33. Born and raised out here, and a lot of the Bravo family is very big out here as well. My grandmas who, over here, who owned the property, who bought the property, my grandma Lupi, and my grandma Secundina, they're Diaz. And so my great-grandma Irene married my grandpa Jimmy, and my dad is, you know, the product of that marriage, and all the rest of his brothers and sisters are Mayorgas over here, which are another big family out here in Venice and Santa Monica. He ended up being a pretty, you know, big-time dude. Being around my dad and kind of looking at his life, you know, he did a lot of things that weren't, you know, righteous per se, you know, but at the same time, given the social dynamic, he was a very good man, you know, very good father, you know, protected his family. Because a lot of times, a lot of this gang stuff, for the most part, comes back down to protecting your family and being there for your community, because that's the origins of a lot of so-called gangs. There used to be called clubs and what have you, and they were originally groups that protected their community against a lot of like the Zuchu riots and things of that nature a lot of times. And even to this day, I run into people even like old Shoreline Crips too, and they all just really give me like this really kind of very deep, heartfelt like respect and all that. Even though they know my dad, passed away like 30-something years ago now, 34 years I think it was. As of yesterday actually, he died June 6th. I had one incident while I was on the bus, and this one older guy, he had kind of kneeled down on the bus in the back here. There's like people around looking at him. That's all weird and awkward. He was giving me thanks and saying how much he loved my dad. Like, well, he wasn't drunk or anything. He was like sober and things like that. Like things of that caliber always happen very frequently when I mention him and to other people in Venice. So.
This image was submitted by Michael Cramer, written by Michael Cramer, read by Ruth. My life back then was one long rush of surfing, skating, and drinking cheap malt liquor, bought for us by any number of street dwellers willing to trade a shard of their shanky morals for a cool or cold can. It was exhaling Marlboros by day and inhaling drugs by night. It was summer living year-round, skipping school with the scent of salt air, hippie incense, and coconut oil that never really washed far away. It was tar in the tides and on the soles of our feet. It was a cold 40 at 10 in the morning. It was a way of life, all held together by Mr. Zog's surf wax, beach cruisers, and drum circles. It was living with sand and insanity in everything you owned. And when the sun went down, it was Venice nights. But that's another story for another day. Yet happily, in time, there were also many like me who made the mayhem into something good. We survived and we thrived. And now we have an indelibly tattooed spirit, a tie-dyed soul that found its heart from growing up in Venice.
My name is Jenna Lasco, and the picture is of me riding my 68 Weber Feather. So I've had it for almost 35 years. Recently had it restored about 5 years ago. And I took it out whenever the guys went out, Santa Monica, Venice. Didn't matter how big the waves were, I had to go out. I couldn't sit on the beach and watch them having fun. Probably it was a combination of adrenaline rush and getting to hang out with the guys, but I would paddle out in huge waves without a leash, and sometimes they'd tease me. I was like the indicator. They knew when a set was coming because I'd paddle farther out so I wouldn't get caught inside. But it was all about being in the water, and so whenever I think of Venice, I just think of the Weber. I still paddle out when I can, but I don't know if I'll ever take the Weber out again. So that day from the picture, I went down Navy Street to the beach and drug my board down into Venice and found a spot where like nobody was out, and it was a small glassy day. When the conditions are like that, it's kind of like you're sliding across satin, so it was pretty sweet. So because it didn't have a leash and I took it everywhere from it got dinged a lot, and so I would take it out to Pico and Sepulveda to Wilbur's shop, and he was the ding king, and he'd fix it for me for like a couple 6-packs of beer. So one time some of my friends from UCLA asked me if I'd surf in a contest up in Rincon because UCLA needed some girls. I guess somebody was sick or something and they needed some points. I managed to get through a heat. I don't know how. The waves were like closeouts for shortboards, and I'm on my big old longboard without a leash. But anyway, I got us a couple points, and so I thought it was kind of fun. So I decided to try out for the UCLA surf team, and that happened in Venice, actually, the tryouts one day on the beach, and my boyfriend and I went down there, and I paddled out into my heat for the tryout for the team, but I didn't know the rules, and I caught too many waves, and so I was disqualified, so I never got to surf on the UCLA surf team except that one time. I think I could tell you stories about the Weber all night, but it would probably take like a 6-pack of beer. Thanks, Ruth.
This is a picture of my mom taken when she was a teenager. Her name was Reneau Smith when she was born, and most people knew her as Reneau Taylor. She ran the Free Store, which was a place where people could come get free clothes that were donated by the community for the community. And every weekend she would pull all those old clothes out onto the lawn of the Venice Christian Community Church, which was on Washington Way, and I can't even remember. It was right over there across the street from Kim's Market. She and my childhood friend Trini Aguero, gosh Trini, sorry if I got your name wrong, her mother Maria ran the Free Store every weekend in the most selfless way to serve the community. My mom was a good woman and I remember her. Anyhow, she raised me. My name is Ruth Chase. I'm the artist of the West of Lincoln Project in Venice, which is where I grew up, where I remained until I took care of my mom in her last days, which was up to 2001 when I moved away. I thought the painting wouldn't be complete unless I included her photograph as well.
Yeah, hi, this is Mark Rosenberg, and my brother Jeff had an idea, give everybody the opportunity to skate on Venice Beach. That was in '76, and pretty much the rest is history. When we started renting skates, first of all, people didn't flock. Venice was still a quiet community with mostly locals. It had its reputation which preceded it, and not a lot of people came, and I was down there nearly every day hawking skates to people, and people were a little standoffish at first. So that was pretty much the beginning. We were in a truck on Thornton Avenue, in a parking lot, renting. We had 40 pair of skates to start out with, 7 days a week, and within just a few months, things started to catch on, and we were able to rent a storefront and open a location. Did I mention the name Cheapskates? I don't know if I mentioned that we named the company Cheapskates. It was just a super, super friendly atmosphere. The best times. And by 1978, Mayor Tom Bradley had declared Venice the roller skating capital of the world. Times when there was more people on skates than walking or riding bicycles. It was an amazing time. So roller skating brought about the popularity of Venice, and in doing so, the beach became too crowded to skate. After just a few years, rental shops started closing, and I don't know, it kind of breaks my heart. I mean, it's pretty sad. I would rather have the beach opened up for beach activities and not a mile-long swap meet.
I am Stacy McDannold. This photograph was taken, I'm going to say 76, 77 maybe? The photograph in the pavilion. It was an ugly day that day, I recall. And that's where my stomping grounds were. That's where I hung out. That's where I pretty much met all of the people I know from Venice, was in the pavilion. I was pretty much, I grazed in Culver City, but when I got in trouble, I'd run away, and that's where I went, right to Venice. I slept in the pavilion, I partied in the pavilion, you name it. I skated, I jumped tables, I got shot at a concert. The good days. I love that place. Wish they never would have tore it down.
This is a photograph of Denise Woods at age 11, read by Ruth Chase. I always come back to Venice. As a little farm girl, I spent summers there visiting family. This is what Venice meant then. Summer vacations, the canals, the beach, the boardwalk. These heart-shaped shades from Sunglass Hut, buying my first cassette tape. It was Cyndi Lauper. The Hare Krishnas throwing peanuts. Rosalind and David sounding like the bayou. The smell of Windward Farms. Harry Perry moving like God. Then, in college, weekends in Venice. A refuge of familiarity. Family dinners, watching the world stroll by on Rialto Avenue. Now, middle-aged and far away, I get that Venice is my heritage. I always come back, and every time I arrive in our neighborhood, I am that little girl again, the little girl Ruth captured in her painting. It's weird and wonderful how, despite its apparent changes, Venice remains the constant in my life. Denise Woods is also a critical part of making the West of Lincoln project happen. She painstakingly transcribed the 11 audio interviews onto paper. Thank you, Denise.
This is Richard Cortez, born in 1962. Born in Los Angeles at UCLA Hospital, and grew up in Venice, California. And that's Robert Ayers and myself. We grew up together as kids. We played in the empty lots together, and grew up in Venice when Venice was Venice. You know, as we both working in recovery together, and then he got cancer and he died. I lived on Santa Clara, and a lot of my life I lived on 70 Broadway, across the street from Oakwood Park. We used to hang out at Oakwood Park all the time. When we were growing up, the beach was fun. It wasn't like commercial like it is now. Basically, I grew up in the time of Venice when Venice was family but crazy. You know, there was gang stuff going on, but at the same time, everybody knew everybody. And there was like, you know, there used to be the railroad tracks that were on electric, and I actually spent a lot of time on West Venice Street Electric. It's called the White House, and that's where the guys I grew up we sang out right there on that porch right there. Then across the street, we go across the street to the Teen Post, which is right there in Washington, which they call Abbott Kinney now, but I still call it West Washington Boulevard and West Venice Street. A lot of stuff going on. I've been involved in a lot of stuff. Been in recovery for 17 years, and hand them over to somebody who does that can help them. You know, that's what I do. That's my mission today, to help others to get back to the place I grew up in that was chaos when I was growing up, but at the same time it's home. I go every Tuesday too to my aunt still lives on Sunset. She's 92 years old. And I go spend some time with her on Tuesdays, and I go take her some food, and I just, you know, there's just like 3 or 4 houses that I know in Venice that I could go to today, you know, just walk in like I used to. I can go to the White House still, which is painted green now on West Venice Electric. My aunt's house on Sunset. My boy Gus's house right there on Oakwood in California by the alley. Basically, that's it. Everybody else has moved out or, you know, we're gone. You know, it's not the Venice I grew up in. Well, the Pavilion, where they had the free concerts, we used to watch Peaches and Herb and the Gap Band. You know, it was just a different time and place. You know, you used to be able to go out to the beach when I was growing up and we had the grass out there. And all the different families, they're black, white, Mexican, but everybody's families would be out on the grass, the sheets, and you can go eat at any of them. You know, everybody knew everybody. You know, the days are over with for a lot of people. You know, you used to be able to go out to the beach when I was growing up and we had the grass out there. And all the different families, they're black, white, Mexican, but everybody's families would be out on the grass, the sheets, and you can go eat at any of them. You know, everybody knew everybody. You know, the days are over with for a lot of people.
My name is Bernardo, and I lived there on Abbott Kinney for about 18 years. I remember it was a Wednesday because we used to play volleyball on the beach, but there was a palatable sense of unease. We knew what was happening, and we knew what was going to happen. For some reason, we still went down to Woody's on Florence to pick up a smoked turkey. While we were there, the whole situation erupted a block and a half away on Florence and Normandy, and we were literally standing there in the shop watching this happen on the television. It was surreal. It was really bizarre. So we hightailed it out of there, and again, for some unknown reason, I don't remember, we stopped at Home Depot, And on the way out, it was some kind of altercation between my friend and somebody else there, and it was just bizarre. We came back to Venice. I was living on West Washington that had just been turned to Abbot Kinney. We had just changed the name to Abbot Kinney Boulevard, and they had planted palm trees. So it was sort of like a new Abbot Kinney Boulevard. But that night, we heard that one of the neighbors that had remodeled their house were broken into, and they held the family hostage in the bathroom while they lit their house on fire. It was really bizarre. It was really unsettling. And the next day, I remember we were standing out on the street, and I just was looking at our street, and I just saw our glass breaking. I had just had some filming next door, and they had broken all the glass because they had set off some charges for their film and all this. It was a whole thing. And so for some reason I was very protective of the glass, and I looked across the street. There was a lot, which is a Michael Sant building now, that it was all sort of cordoned off with scaffolding, and it was all covered in plywood and billboards. And so I said, let's just raid the plywood here, and we boarded everything up from San Juan all the way down to Westminster. And once we had the storefronts boarded up, I was living in my studio, so I went ahead and took off. I went off to Santa Fe, where I had some friends, and spent the weekend there until the curfews were lifted. And when I came back to LA, I realized that I had Michael McNeely's World War and World Peace posters on my storefront. And that's the origin of that photo.
They are the product of everything right from the community of Venice. They are the Venice Dream Team, school-age photographers, and with a lot of support from their neighborhood, they are literally taking the world by storm.
A special group of kids from Venice Beach in Southern California.
I've never been out of state of California in my life. So this is my first time, and like flying in a plane that long was so crazy.
Better to travel because you just see new things. You see beautiful things. You see things that aren't so beautiful, but you just see new things.
We're at the Eiffel Tower, and I'm interviewing Cramer.
Hello.
Wait, I want to get a picture of Notre Dame real quick.
Every time they come back, I see some difference of maturity and some joy for seeing other places.
I've been to Paris, London, Rome, Switzerland, Venice.
And the list goes on and on.
Berlin, Amsterdam.
And what do you want the world to see in your pictures?
I like for them to see like how in many ways people are the same in those places as they are here.
We learn about how other people live while we're taking pictures.
Preteen photographers just came back from a 22-day-long cross-country trip trying to help other kids in other cities set up dream teams of their own. They're snapping photos and documenting the faces of LA, learning about their own talents and about the work of their subject. Cramer has been to 35 cities in 11 different countries.
Bingwa said to me at one time that he didn't feel that he gave anything to the children. I'm getting teary talking about it. That he didn't really teach them anything. And I told him that I felt he taught them the ultimate gift of selflessness, for someone to give so much of themselves for nothing.
This image was submitted by Laura Ceballos. I was born and raised in Venice. My parents moved to Venice in the 1960s and bought a house. I have two older sisters, Helen and Mary. Both of my parents immigrated from Mexico, Jalisco and Nayarit. My dad was a mechanic and worked at a local gas station in Venice. My mom worked at Papermate factory and later in the electronics factories, both in Santa Monica. Back in the day, there were a lot of electronics factories locally that would assemble airplane parts. As a community organizer and leader, I have a passion to give back to my community, the community of Venice. I am also the parade director of the Venice Cinco de Mayo Parade Festival, and I'm honored to have played a major role in bringing back this historical event that has existed in Venice since the 1960s. As a child, I remember watching the parade go down Rose Avenue in Venice. It was important for me to commemorate the Mexican people's defeat of invading the French in 1862, to celebrate Venice's diversity, and to recognize the Mexican-American heritage. Mexicans have had a long history in Venice, and it's important to preserve our history on the West Side. Read by Ruth Chase for Laura Ceballos.
My name is Jaynes. Most people I grew up with still call me Tammy, and I grew up, born and raised in Venice, California. This photograph was at my house where I grew up, which was on 28th and Speedway, right in Venice, right on the sand, not too far from West Side. And that was the summer of 1984, and we were all getting ready to go to a party in Culver City. Anybody who grows up in Venice knows that can always be a little bit dicey, but it was my mom's best friend's nephew. So it turned out to be a fun party, but all us girls were getting ready at the house, which was Diane Price, who's now Zarate, Kim Peacock, who's now Kim Peacock Rocha, and Gina Marie Hines, who's now Gina Marie Hines Valdez, myself, still Samara James, and Andrea Rodriguez. So you can tell it's 1984 by the way we all lined up and we're all ready. Same hair, same clothes, everything was big. Growing up in Venice was definitely an experience that I'm glad that I had, because you learn to deal with people from all walks of life, all different socioeconomic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, and you get a chance to interact, and I think it's a real good basis for the rest of your life in being able to fit in wherever you go. And not everybody has that ability, but those of us from Venice do. So it was a real special, unique, very interesting with all the drugs and stuff in the 60s and 70s, but I wouldn't have wanted to grow up anywhere else.
I am Carrie Hayrup, the daughter of Jean Tarango. The photo was taken in 1949 in Venice on Marine Street. I think he probably was like maybe 11 or 12. The photo was of my dad sitting on the wall of a house that we lived in on Marine Street. And he was there hanging out in his shiny, shiny black shoes and his iron jeans, which I always remember my dad being so immaculate. And he grew up in Venice, and I basically hung out in Venice as a young child and spent time with my grandma in Venice, and learned a lot about Venice through my dad. They grew up on Marine Street for a long time, and then they moved to Rose, and that was the last place my grandmother lived. He went to Venice High for a while, and then he decided he didn't want the riffraff anymore, so he went to Hamilton High. And my father was Latin and Italian, and my grandmother, my Nana, was full Mexican. I was raised in Playa del Rey, but I really believe I grew up in Venice. I spent a lot of time there in my later years as well, and I remember my dad telling me places to never go, and I ended up going there. I worked at West Beach Cafe. I was a sous chef there for almost 3 years. It was a great restaurant. It was known as one of the best restaurants in its time in Venice. A lot of people I know from there are still good friends. It's awesome.
This is in memory of George Del Rio, who passed away in 1997. This is Corey Cody Warman. The picture is of George Del Rio and Danny Cahill at the beach in Mexico. For me, George represented Venice. I met him when I was in 7th grade at Mark Twain Junior High, and I lived in Mar Vista, but he was from Venice. George and I had a friendship that started when I was 12 years old that lasted all the way into our 20s. And it's funny because I tell people that I grew up in Mar Vista, but I was raised in Venice, which is so true.
My name is Melanie Camp from Australia. I think, you know what, doing news in Venice has really made me see that there are middle people in Venice. Like, there is a middle class here. There are people that aren't super wealthy, and there are people that aren't living on the streets. And those people are working really, really hard to get by and to keep their place, you know, to stay living in Venice and to hold on. And I think once you've been here and you love the personality of this place, it's very hard to find something that matches that. And so I think there is a part of Venice, the hard-working, the real people of Venice, that really are very inspiring. And I think that has really helped me doing the news and then coming through what I'm gone through and realising that, like, just because you don't have millions of dollars doesn't mean you have to be homeless, but then understanding how easy it is for any of us who are going paycheck to paycheck. We are very close to being on the street. The thing that I've really come to admire are the people who don't end up homeless. People in Venice who are still hanging in there, who still have a roof over their head. I think they understand what it is to, how hard, it's hard work. Like, life is really tough. I don't think that makes it bad. I used to think that was a scary thought to admit that life is tough because that, it was too hard to overcome, but it's not. Like, life is tough, but humans are tough.
My name is Christina Brunk Stroh. I am the oldest child of J.Kevin Brunk. My parents moved to Venice Beach in the early 80s when I was a baby. My father liked the character, nature, and freedom of Venice. In this photograph of my father, taken by an up-and-coming local artist named Matthew Martin, they were in the back house of my father's home where he captured my father's expression looking at all the street signs of Washington Boulevard. My father spearheaded the name change from West Washington Way to Abbot Kinney Boulevard in Venice Beach in the early 90s. As a young developer and contractor, he was inspired by Abbot Kinney. My father's vision was to establish Abbot Kinney in Venice, in preserving the history and educating the young. My most significant memories of Venice Beach were on Abbot Kinney. I spent many hours as a young child running through the beach bungalows, playing with junk and treasure at several stores and antique shops. My father had a love of community and passion for arts, and he really thrived in Venice. And from that, I learned a lot. I learned how to make something from nothing, and so my other most memorable moment was when I was 22 and I opened up a deli called Stroh's Gourmet with my husband Jason Stroh on Abbot Kinney as well. So I spent a lot of time on Abbot Kinney. I feel like I was the last generation to experience an analog childhood and the first generation to experience a digital adulthood in Venice, remembering the old Venice and still being able to be part of this new Venice.
Mona Perez regarding Venice, and if you had a billboard, right, what would it say? Authentic Venice. As we all know, it's changed so drastically over the years. So I drew a B and an A for Venice Authentic. I think Venice Authentic is important to me because just growing up in Venice, being a part of that culture, it was authentic to me at the time. Venice means so much to me and meant so much to my grandmother and to my aunt, for 3 generations of women that enjoyed Venice for all its funkiness.